if he was convicted in August of 79, letters from September through about the following March, there's no question that those letters were expressing, sympathy and saying things that I believed at the time, which upon further reflection, I would no longer believe. In one letter, I said, anybody could see in 5 minutes you didn't get a fair trial. Living with his defense through 7 weeks and looking at the trial through their eyes, even though the jury verdict was guilty and I could see the rationale behind it, at the same time, I felt that his lawyer, Siegel, had made a strong case about how unfair the judge was. Later, when you read what actually happened at the bench conferences in the appellate record, the bench conferences are public record, but they're not immediately available. Mm-hmm. So I have Siegel telling me what the judge said and did. Well, later, when I actually got to read the bench conferences in the transcript, it was a very different thing. And Siegel had misrepresented, I felt, what was going on. So I later formed the opinion that he had, in fact, received a fair trial, although I had earlier expressed to him the view in one sentence that anybody could see that you didn't, Did I have a legal obligation when I changed my mind to say, oh, by the way, in regard to my letter of September 19th, where I say anybody could see within 5 minutes you didn't get a fair trial, I must inform you now that my view has changed and I now believe you did get a fair trial? He would suggest in this lawsuit that I did have that kind of an obligation. I don't think I did. I would hope that I didn't. But for 6 months, certainly, I was writing him letters which are warm and friendly and I think compassionate and genuine expressions of sympathy that I felt. At the same time, I'm working. I'm reading the Article 32 hearing. I'm going through, talking to more people, getting out. In March, it really began to change in March of 80 when I went back down and I started to talk to the jurors. I talked to a number of the jurors. I, for the first time, was able to interview the prosecution. People wouldn't go near me because I was living with the MacDonald group during the trial. That's the way I wanted to do it. I said, there's always going to be time for me later to go to the other side and talk to them about what they were thinking and doing all this time. But I can't be going from one camp to the other while the trial is going on. So I thought the interesting thing would be to be inside the defense thing. Well, months after that, I went through papers and stuff, and I finally got around in the spring of 1980 to seeking to talk to the prosecution. And at first they were reluctant. They said, well, wait a minute, aren't you the guy that's writing this book, from MacDonald's point of view? And I said, I'm writing the book from my point of view. And I was with him during the trial, as you know, but the book, is not bound to portray him in any way. I'm only interested in the truth, which is what I was interested in. And they gradually began to talk to me. So I went down to North Carolina. I talked to the FBI guy who did the pajama type reconstruction, which made more sense to me after I'd spent more time with him, seeing some aspects of physical evidence are hard to present in an adversary setting in a courtroom, and they're easy to make fun of. I was certain as to the significance of my own thinking. It just kept evolving. And as it did, you'll see in looking at those letters that there's a kind of abrupt shift in tone, diminishing in the quantity. I mean, they're really, much more time would elapse between letters. And then they become a lot cooler and more businesslike, where I'm no longer expressing sympathy. I'm much more kind of guarded and vague in my references to anything. And to the point where he actually wound up in a letter complaining. Gosh, whatever happened? I thought that we were friends and we used to laugh together and run around the track together, and all that disappeared a year or so ago. After the last year, it's just been this and it's been this, and I'm not so sure anymore. Where's that old warmth I used to feel from you, Joe? That kind of effect.
He noticed.
Oh yeah, he noticed, and it was hard not to notice.
Yeah.
See that. By the time I really had come to the absolute conviction in my mind and heart that he was beyond any doubt guilty of having done this, I just was horrified. What do you do as a guy like that? I was very close to just stopping work on the whole thing a number of times. I said, I just want to walk away from this. But by then I had come to feel, I had met the in-laws and had seen the difference between real suffering and grief and anguish over the loss of these people and this sort of fabricated thing that MacDonald did. And you can just tell. I mean, you can just tell when you're in the presence of something real. And then by having seen that, MacDonald seemed all the more false by by contrast. Then I felt I had some sort of obligation. I had an obligation to write a book. I was just caught up in it. I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't let go. I had to write my way through all this. And I really did come to feel a kind of peculiar obligation to Colette and those two girls, just to tell the truth about what had happened to them. There was never anyone else. No one else was ever going to do it. And to the extent that I could find out what had really happened, I just felt that if I had an emotional commitment anywhere, it was to the victims, not to the man who killed them. They're long dead, So it's by extension, who is it to? It's to the in-laws. We never made any stipulations or demands. They never said, well, you better guarantee us that you're going to write this from our point of view. They just told me anything I asked them.
What was their reaction to the book?
They liked it because it told the truth as they saw it. I think Freddie Kasab liked it more than Mildred did, because Mildred, she didn't dislike it, but she felt that I had been too kind to MacDonald's mother, for one thing. Mildred, over the years, has developed some very strong negative feelings toward anyone associated with MacDonald. Freddie can be a little bit more, he's a little less obviously embittered.
It wasn't his daughter.
It wasn't his daughter. That's right. And he's always had more obvious outlets for his grief, in that he's been the one always to take the active role.
Yep.
He's been the one seeking vengeance or seeking justice, and he's always been the one involved. And Mildred has sat at home all day, staring out the window with her fists clenched, thinking about it, for 15 years. So essentially, they liked the book. They would go on television shows to talk about the book. They allowed themselves to be portrayed in the miniseries based on the book. Even Marie Saint portraying Mildred was not unflattering casting. I mean, Carl Merton portraying Freddie. It was they wound up. I mean, they're not the problem.
Yeah.
But they didn't demand it. They knew that I had been at the trial with MacDonald's people, and they had a lot to overcome in terms of being willing to deal with me.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in regard to the money, Freddie said, I don't like the fact that this guy's getting money from your book. And I said, well, I don't like it either, but there it is, and that's a fact. And there's actually an exchange of correspondence between Kasab and me in the beginning where this is dealt with. And I said, if I can well understand why you might feel that you just don't want to contribute any, of your time or information to any project that would redound to his benefit financially, even if he is in jail for the rest of his life. And I can't argue with you about that. I'm just telling you that I'm trying to do the best job that I can do writing this book, and you could certainly help. I can't change the fact that he has the share of the money. If I could, I would, but I can't. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't even be at this stage. So eventually, Freddie came to recognize he tried to write his own book. He tried to get a contract. He tried a lot of things. And when he finally recognized that my book was going to be the only forum in which this whole story would be told, he decided to cooperate as much as I wanted him to share with me his experiences going back to the beginning of it. And then a lot of the letters from Colette and a lot of things. And I really came to feel much